Warning! Warning! This podcast contains spoilers.
Listen at your own risk.
Welcome to Medium Shift, the podcast that investigates how stories stack up from medium to medium through the adaptation process.
In today's episode, we shrink down into the intricacies and really dissect the character that is the Atom.
In the CW-verse.
Yes.
Yes. Just in case, because there have been other versions of the Atom on screen.
I know, but it's Routhathon.
Yeah.
I figured they get the idea.
Yeah, no, that's fair. All right. Welcome to Medium Shift. I'm Chris.
And I'm Ev.
And this episode, we are trying something a little bit different in that we're not necessarily going to be talking about a specific show or film or piece of media, but we're going to be talking about a character in a larger franchise. Continuing Routhathon, where we talk about the successful and, frankly, less successful exploits of Brandon Routh on screen. We are finally going to be discussing almost certainly his most popular and well-known role for the 21st century, the Atom, on the CW-verse. So originally introduced in Arrow. If you want to hear more details on that, you can obviously listen to our three-parter on it, and then moves into Legends of Tomorrow.
With a few brief stops at The Flash and Vixen.
Yeah, all over the CW-verse, basically.
Yep.
But what exactly, probably the best way to start off with, what do you think about this version of the Atom and this use of Brandon Routh in first Arrow Season 3 and what they've done with the character since?
When it comes to Season 3 of Arrow, as we mentioned, I always felt him kind of off. I loved Brandon Routh, the actor, but I didn't think they were using him to the best of their abilities.
Right, okay.
Early on, I think, though, as time moved on, especially when he jumped onto Legends of Tomorrow, they found exactly what they needed. And I think that his run on Legends Tomorrow up until this most recent season, upcoming, where he's leaving, to be his best sort of work, especially in regards to playing the Atom. He really solidified what the show was and what the Atom, the character, was.
Fair. No, yeah. I think that's entirely valid. I think we've touched on this in the Arrow episode before, but when Brandon Routh was being brought in, he was originally going to play Ted Cord or the Blue Beetle, but that was shelved because there was rumors at the time that they were going to make a Blue Beetle
Booster
Gold movie. That's right. And the CW-verse for the longest time have tried to stay away from what the film versions have been doing, and so
they've been told to.
Well, yeah, sure. And at the last minute, they kind of changed that character into the Atom, and I think that transition you can kind of tell on screen, because the original version of the character is essentially just he's Iron Man, but he shrinks. Like he
didn't even shrink early on.
Well, yeah, exactly. So I mean, it's just it's weird because it's kind of retrofitting a character that was never intended to be that character. I don't know if I feel so strongly about them misusing Brandon Routh in season 3. I think as a romantic foil, I think that was just kind of bled. But I think for the most part, he was ultimately allowed to be his really charming, kind of endearing self, honestly.
Oh, absolutely. When I said he was sort of not used his full potential, I'm basing that on what he sort of became. Again, this is very much hindsight.
Sure.
But with the way he became both as a romantic lead as well as sort of cast of an ensemble, I think they found his place in Legends Tomorrow, which they were still looking for in Arrow.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to describe it. It was a really, really smart decision to change him from a supporting character in Arrow to one of the core ensemble characters in Legends of Tomorrow. So yeah, I think as time has gone on, he's become more classic Atom, I guess. Obviously, we'll get when we start talking about the Atom as a character per se. But initially, he kind of felt like a generic ripoff of Tony Stark or every other, not even Tony Stark, but every other superhero with a highly advanced suit or whatever else. I didn't think there was much that distinguished him outside of the fact that he was charming Brandon Routh as always. But I think he's felt more distinct and has kind of leaned into himself not only more as like kind of a comedic role in some respects, because he's very funny sometimes, as well as being like a hyper intelligent character too. As basically you're saying, I think they kind of find his vibe and his groove as it goes on. But I still enjoyed Brandon Routh initially when he was introduced, just because he is super charming.
Yeah.
He's real lovely. Yeah, no, it's very cool.
Yeah. And one of the things I absolutely love about his version of the character and the way he plays it and the way he plays with the other members of both Arrow and Flash and Legends and Vixen is that he sort of evolves from this sort of more your classic sort of soapy CW type romantic foil.
That's 100% what he was when he was
very
first
sort of
introduced.
masculine, almost like a jealousy kind of thing going on in there. And they've evolved him into this complex character who's sort of like a basic sort of deconstruction of toxic masculinity.
Oh, really?
In the sense that he shows that he can still be a badass while like going against all the stereotypes that sort of associated with that classic masculinity that originally brought in.
I see. He can be like a sweet, sensitive guy.
Yeah,
while
he's
at the same time
he has a great bromance with Steel in
Yes,
Legends.
I love those two
Fantastic.
together.
Yeah, they're great. And so it basically shows you can have a badass character that doesn't fit any of the molds of your classic toxic masculinity style stereotypes.
Sure. Yeah.
Which
okay.
kind of felt like they started going with and then immediately went away with. And I think that's why it works so well as well. Starting from where he started to where he is now.
Sure. I really like that perspective, actually. I didn't think about that. The fact that he went from like the kind of super generic, we bring in a third person to add romantic tension to Felicity and Oliver, into something that, who turns into this really sensitive guy who basically can still be really cool at the same time. No, that's fair. All right.
And they end up putting him together relationship-wise with probably his best fit in Courtney Ford.
Yeah. In actual life.
Yes.
In real life. Kind of makes sense. She's leaving as well, isn't she?
Yes.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
both
So,
are.
yeah, which is entirely fair. But no, he's had a really good run. And a lot of people come and go through like Legends Tomorrow all the time. I think that of the CW shows, we got to be careful that this doesn't just turn to an episode on Legends Tomorrow, because that is a whole other discussion in itself. But Legends, I think in many respects, is hands down the strongest conceptually show of the whole CW verse. Like, not only is it a shorter season, but they can also do way more wacky things in every other episode. Like, every episode feels distinct. They've got a really fun cast of characters that they can just mess around with and have great dynamics with and swap out in between seasons too. So all of that,
And
I think,
there's
is really
great
fun.
chemistry with so many of the characters, especially when you look at like the basically the trio that have remained from the beginning to until Brandon Routh leaves.
Yeah.
This sort of thing of Brandon Routh, Katie Lotz, and Dominic Purcell.
Yep.
The three of them together are absolutely just magic.
Oh, yeah.
In every scene they put together.
Yeah, Legends is one of those shows that while I'm watching it, I always get the sensation that being on set must be really fun. And I have no reason to confirm that. I've never seen any behind the scenes interviews or anything like that. But it's just the way that so much of the energy and the enjoyment of the characters and the scripts and all that just seems to show up on screen, to the fact that I feel like a lot of these people just get on really well and it's just a really good, fun atmosphere. And that kind of comes through. And I think Brandon Routh is a big part of that, because he is obviously super charming and a really core and entertaining part of that show. So yeah, it's great. Yeah. Awesome. Do we want to move into Atom as a wider comic book character then? Or?
Yeah, sure.
Yep.
So the Atom has been around for a while. He was sort of, I think it was, I want to say like 70s, 80s was his...
Yeah, it was definitely mid-Silver Age.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah, for
that
sure.
he sort of especially came into fruition as like a proper character and eventual member of the Justice League. But he's also never been like the forefront of any of their big things. When you think DC, you think the Trinity, you think the Justice League.
Yep.
Even when you mention Atom, you're sort of thrown with, are you talking about the Atom or Captain Atom?
That's
in a
true.
way.
Yeah. He's always been a bit of a small supporting character.
Get out.
I'm leaving. I got it.
So I'm doing the rest of this episode by myself now.
I'm coming back. No, I'm sorry. I saw that. I heard it. And I'm like, I gotta go for this. Yep. Anyway, what were you saying? Something about the Atom? Yep.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, he has never been a major player in the DC universe, but he's always sort of been there.
He's always been...
Nope.
Yep, no, it's fine. Yeah. I already made that joke. I don't want to be lazy and make it again. Yeah. No.
And he's one of those sort of characters that represents the heart of DC. I feel there's a lot of these characters. A lot of the ones that actually got adapted into CW shows. So Green Arrow, Flash, Atom. A lot of these, they sort of represent the humanity side of the DC pantheon.
Like the more grounded characters, basically.
Yes.
Because I mean, like so many of like the big Trinity, especially like Superman and Wonder Woman, like the way I hear DC described all the time, and I've probably used this on the podcast before, is like God's trying to become men.
Yeah.
In that respect, and that these people so far beyond them. But you're right, people like Arrow, like the Green Arrow and the Atom especially, feel almost like Marvel characters in some ways, and that they're kind of like flawed, grounded human beings that are trying to become better themselves. Yeah. So yeah,
there's a great little in his origin story in Atom. There's a great moment where he basically has to save a group of children and his girlfriend from being trapped in a cave. And he does that by testing his unshrinking ray with no real backup to everything up to that point has exploded after a little time. And he's found no way of actually returning them to proper size. But he realizes that that's the only way he's going to get out. So he shrinks himself and just finds a way out and accidentally runs back into the ray, which brings him back to real size, which has not happened before. And he's like, oh, I guess I'm not dying today.
Cool.
That's fine. But I feel that's sort of like one of those sort of core, as we said in last episode, the sort of cardinal aspects of the character is the fact that he is just a man trying to help whoever he can in their dire situations, kind of thing,
and constantly puts himself at risk though as well. Yes. Like it's a constant recurring theme through Legends of Tomorrow that the Atom has to like shrink down and do something like super risky or dangerous. So,
and he's always willing to do that to put his friends first. And I think that's one of the best ways that they've sort of adapted in the series. In across all of the ways he does it, he's very much like, I'm doing this for the betterment of as many people, regardless of what it does to me.
Sure. Yep.
So yeah, that is essentially the character of the Atom, who's basically, in a more physical sense and a more sort of like objective sense, he's just a scientist who finds white dwarf matter that is sort of condensed into this weird ball thing and basically shoots out of a meteorite and lands on Earth that he finds, and it's got weird mass altering abilities. He turns that into a special lens that he shines ultraviolet light through, and that causes the shrinking. And there's something in his body that allows him to actually return to full size and not explode as much.
That's fun.
Yeah. As everything else that he seems to shrink. And so that he then basically tries to fight crime, both to help his lawyer girlfriend with her cases, and just as a way of helping the disenfranchised while he works on his doctorate.
Yeah, like ultimately a fairly idealistic character who is, still very much fits into that general science mold of this is, experimentation, gets his powers through his intellect as opposed to any sort of like preconceived or like foundational ability. But also ultimately altruistic. And I think that really shows not necessarily in the original introduction of the Atom, especially considering he's running like his own tech company and things like that, which is fairly distinct from the Atom. I mean, this version of the character, the Atom, is quite distinct from the Atom in the comics in a lot of ways.
And especially when you link into the fact that he was meant to be Ted Cord originally, that makes things a lot more clear that it's sort of a mixture of the two characters. Which works very well, because I do feel Blue Beetle, across as many incarnations, and whoever has wielded the Scarab has always sort of been one of those ones of dealing with like the altruistic side and trying to build. So it's a...
Yeah, exactly. Blue Beetle, especially my favorite version of Blue Beetle, Jaime Reyes, who is the successor to Ted Cord, is very much like almost a Spider-Man figure of this young kid with great power comes great responsibility, and he ultimately just keeps screwing himself over because he's trying to help. Yeah. So yeah, and I think that kind of embodies himself in Ray Palmer too.
Yeah. So I think they chose the right shift to make into when they changed their superhero ideas basically on the fly.
Sure.
It was a nice transition.
Yeah, exactly. It was smoother than it could have been.
Yeah.
That's for sure. One of the other things I find quite interesting about this version of the character, in that it very much seems inspired by the fact that Brandon Routh is playing him.
Yes.
I mean, like, the Atom in the... obviously, I'm definitely not as familiar with the Atom in the comics and in other media as you would be. But my general understanding of him would be he's not particularly a comic relief character. He's more kind of like the supporting scientific interest as such.
Yeah.
And seen in like other shows like Young Justice, Batman Brave and the Bold as well. But he's given much more of like a lighthearted, fun role, generally because it plays into Brandon Routh's strengths. So I find it, we sort of touched on it briefly every now and then about how casting is such a critical thing about the adaptation of characters and how characters can change from book to screen. Yeah. But in a lot of respects, like Robert Downey Jr. is a great example, but casting certain people that have such a strong personality can really explicitly affect the version of the character that shows up on screen. Like, especially with Robert Downey Jr. in the Marvel movies, like, you're not really sure where Tony Stark Robert Downey Jr. ends and Tony Stark begins, because there's such a melding between like his natural charismatic, egotistic personality and the character. And I kind of feel like something similar has happened with Brandon Routh, in that they've almost turned the character into a more lighthearted, maybe comic relief is a strong way of saying it, but a more fun character than he is in the comics, purely because that is just the presence that Brandon Routh projects on screen. So, and I think that's a really smart choice.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you on that remark, especially because, as you see, he's sort of grown and adapted to the role, and they've also seemingly changed some of the stuff around the show to better fit Routh's interpretation, I guess, of Atom.
Sure.
Especially, again, going back to Legend Tomorrow, because that's where he's most known. The sort of the plane of the relationships that he has with those ideas, I think better suits Brandon Routh than it does the Atom.
Yep.
And it all just works out for the better, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, this version of the Atom, even if he may still be called the Atom and Ray Palmer and such, is more like a three-way conglomerate of the Atom, Ted Kord, and Brandon Routh.
Yep.
As like a persona all into one. And I think it's a combination that really works and they've used to the best of their ability, because honestly, I think Legends of Tomorrow probably has the best writing of any of the CW shows, even if it is super melodramatic in the same way that Arrow and Flash still sometimes bothers me. It's just... It's so much fun. It feels like such a lighthearted series, and Brandon Routh really leans into that. It's great. It's basically like, it's almost like Doctor Who mixed with like the best versions of The Flash. I think the best episodes of The Flash. Yeah, I think it's really strong.
Excellent.
Cool.
So is there a way you want to do it differently?
Somehow. I'm not really sure how exactly we were going to fit the do it differently into this episode. Outside of like drastically changing a lot of the things around it. So would you like to go first? Or
Well, first we need the jingle.
That's true. Yep.
Yeah. But sure. Because like you said, when we were going into this, I didn't really know how we were going to manage the do it differently. What I've sort of gone with was I sort of had an idea for do it differently for Legends of Tomorrow.
Okay.
And I was just going to pitch that and then expand out how I'd sort of create this. Because this is not going to be I'm going to try and fix Legends or I'm going to try and do it. I'm taking some of the core ideas of Legends and completely shoved it into a new thing.
Right, okay.
So what I'm pitching is Legends Tomorrow and by extension Atom, the sitcom version.
Oh, okay.
So
I'm interested.
For some reason, I came up with this idea of basically almost taking away all the superhero and the time travel, all the things that made Legends of Tomorrow what it is, and seeing if it still be an entertaining product with just the characters. And so basically it is workers at like this sort of surf resort chain, I guess, who also happen to live there 'cause it's a big island sort of thing. And it follows the two housemates of Ray Palmer and Sarah Lance as they sort of deal with their odd couple type scenario. Their grouchy neighbor, Heatwave, Mick Rory, I believe he is called, and the cavalcade of casts that keep coming in and out, sometimes living in the hotel, sometimes not. You have his best friend, Ray Palmer's best friend in Steel, Nathaniel something or other.
Yeah, it's just Nathaniel was fine. I know who you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what happens when Ray Palmer starts dating the daughter of Sarah Lance's evil ex-boss of Damien Dark. And yeah, basically turn this into a weird sitcom thing. I think the main reason I thought of this is because it's a testament to what the characters themselves have become, and how the show is entirely almost built around those sort of varying connections and those relationships and the way the characters play off each other. That I feel you could take them out of what they are known for, stick them in a completely new genre, and still find ways to make it interesting and make it work. And I feel if I then expand on with the character of Ray Palmer in this new setting, you could do also some really interesting stuff with that as well. Like his work on Arrow would be his prequel in setting up as the main head of IT of the go, and going and building up and changing, and how he learned to adapt into from a small independent company to this now ensemble group, and dealing with head of security Sarah Lance later on in the line.
Holy hell.
Yeah, it basically I just wanted to show that I feel the character himself is enough of a both new character and homage to everything that it's become, that you can stick him in entirely non-superhero related situations and still get a good sense of what that character at its heart is.
Sure. Yeah. Plus, I mean, I think if I'm being entirely honest, I think the ensemble for Legends is strong enough that I would probably still watch that. In all honesty, I just love the idea of, like, you know, the kind of like 80s sitcom introduction where everyone turns and smiles at the camera, but with like the Legends of Tomorrow. That's such a beautiful image, and now I desperately want to see that. And yet, I think you're absolutely right, that I think in many ways it would kind of still play into the strengths of like the charisma and the really strong dynamics between characters and all that, while still taking away a lot of the fun stuff of Legends, because I think one of the great things about it is that how each episode is so distinct because of its time travel component.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's still definitely very interesting. And because, I mean, hey, it's definitely do it differently. And for the most part, we tend to approach do it differently is just do it better, like how we would improve it. But every now and then I do think it's fun to think about what's a completely drastically different way we can take this idea. And I think that's a fun one. Yeah, very good. Very good. Mine, by contrast, is nowhere near as drastic.
Oh, yeah?
In all honesty, what I was thinking I would want to do is basically look at how Brandon Routh was introduced into the CW verse and maybe shift that. I would still want him to move into Legends of Tomorrow eventually, but what I would want to do is actually take him out of Arrow, because I didn't really care about the whole love triangle thing, essentially. Want to remove that completely, which will retroactively improve Arrow Season 3, and then basically introduce the Atom in Flash Season 2 instead. Not only because I think the Atom as a character suits better that ensemble and that series, because he can basically just come in as like a new scientist in Star Labs. I think he would have a really great dynamic with the rest of the cast. He doesn't necessarily have to be like a new romantic interest for anyone or anything like that, but can just come in as like a new mentor or support or scientific figure for Barry, which I think would be great. I think it means you could really lean into, especially in his introduction, his intellect and his altruism. I think that would fit a lot better in The Flash than it would as a tech CEO, as he was introduced in Arrow Season 3. And I really think that would have made for a stronger addition of the character, as well as improving Flash Season 2 as well, which I think dips a little bit in comparison to Flash Season 1. So it would improve Arrow Season 3, it improve Flash Season 2. I think it'd be a more authentic version of the character initially, and then he can show up in Legends once Legends starts down the line. So, yep.
I see that as another interesting tech. I see that as improving a lot of some of the flaws that he originally had as a base character.
Sure, yep.
I don't know what you'd fill the gap in for Arrow Season 3 with, but
just don't need a love triangle. Just cut it out completely.
Yeah, I understand that, but there's also integral to the main storyline.
Yeah,
But that's
no, I
something
get
else
that.
we can think
Yeah.
about.
You could
another
you could
day.
replace him with some other sort of CEO type figure
Yeah.
or something like that. There'd be many other ways you could go about it, I thought.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But I do like that transposing. It would fit better for what he eventually becomes in Legends.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So he basically starts in a better position, ultimately, I think, which improves it all around. Yeah.
But I'm assuming he just ends up in the same position as he is right now.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, just a different introduction, essentially. I still want him to keep totally the same on Legends and all that as well. So yeah, fun. Cool.
Brilliant.
Okay. Yeah, huzzah. I mean, this has been a fairly brief episode for the most part, but we can move into what we can recommend for this episode too, if you so desire.
Yep.
What have you got for us?
Absolutely.
Or do you want me to go first?
I'm happy to go first because it's the return of my segment within a segment.
Oh.
Why does everything I love die?
Why does everything I love die? What do you got?
So yes, continuing with the theme of Routhathon, I have another little thing, and possibly a bit of an influence on my Do It Differently. I'm looking at Partners.
Oh, okay.
So Partners was a very short-lived sitcom. I think they made like 10 episodes and released about 8.
Oh, wow. That's not a good sign.
No, it did not do well. But it was created by the same creative team that made Will and Grace.
Okay.
So it has that pedigree. Potentially could have worked if circumstances had been different. But it basically follows a couple of couples and their sort of interactions together. So it's 2 partners in an architecture firm. One is gay, one is straight. And they've been best friends since childhood. And each are in relationships at sort of their newish phases.
Okay.
And Brandon Routh is in it and plays the gay boyfriend of the one of the main 2 architects fellows. Does a great little job. So many little references to his career, including Superman.
Oh, nice.
Which I love. And it's just another great little way of showing off Brandon Routh's more comedic side, because he's very much sort of a dim kind of character in this. He's very well-meaning and altruistic in the same sense, so it's a kind of similar-ish character.
Sure.
And yeah, I just think it's worth giving a little check out as one of those little just sit back and not think too hard about it shows, if you can somehow find it anymore.
Yeah, sure. Do you know why it was cancelled exactly? Was it production troubles? Did it just not rate very well?
I think it was ratings, and the broadcaster just went, nah, we're going to replace it with something that is working. So here's repeats of 2.5 Men, or something along those lines.
Yeah, sure. When exactly did this come out then? What year?
It wasn't too long ago. I want to say it was about 2012, 2013.
Sure. Yeah, so kind of around the time when a few years before he started as the Atom then.
Yeah.
It
was,
in between that time.
before Atom.
Yeah, sure. Okay, interesting. I'd never even heard of it, honestly.
Yeah, I just randomly stumbled upon it one day, catching like little highlights, I think it was, on YouTube, and I went, oh, well, this show's on, and it's gone now. Okay.
That's rough.
Yeah.
The moment you fall in love with something, it's like, oh, it's gone. Yep.
Everything I love dies.
Yeah, exactly.
Jingle.
It's always, I find it really difficult for shows that I know, once I find out that a show has been cancelled, like suddenly, like a lot of Netflix shows get cancelled after 2 seasons. If I haven't started the show at that point, I'm probably never going to, because I don't want to get invested in something that I know is going to end untimely, even if I know going into it that it will. It's just, I don't know, I find it really frustrating. So yeah, I mean, it depends on the show. Like, I still enjoyed aspects of what I saw on Powerless and such, because those individual episodes were fun enough, but ultimately for ongoing serialized narratives, I think having a sudden end is just ultimately really unsatisfying. It's a shame, but it's just the way it goes. For my recommendation, I'm going back to the pool of films that I saw at the Melbourne International Film Festival recently. One of my other favourite films, in comparison to the one I recommended last episode, Honeyland, is a film called The Day Shall Come. So this is directed by the same guy who did a film called Four Lions in 2012. Are you familiar with this film? Or?
I am. Well, Four Lions, yes. I am familiar.
Yeah, sure. Have you seen it? Or
a while back, I think.
Okay, yeah. So for people who aren't familiar, Four Lions is like a really intense black comedy about a bunch of essentially Islam extremists in the UK who are trying to basically commit a bombing, but are the most incompetent people you have ever
So
seen.
inept.
Yeah. So it's a really, like, obviously it's a very intense and like topical and difficult subject matter, but I think that film did a really smart job of like showing like not only the comedic side and laughing at some really dark stuff, but also doing a really great job of showing kind of the ideological slant of people like that and kind of the problems behind that ideology. The Day Shall Come is the film he's made after that. It's been quite some time, obviously, but it's very similar in that it follows a bunch of black extremists living in Miami, and basically the cat and mouse game they play with the FBI over there. So it's very similar in that it's a black comedy. It's very, very funny. Like, it's utterly ridiculous. The extremists in this case are like kind of the leader over there is the main protagonist of the film. He's a little bit mentally unwell, and he essentially just, what's the best way to describe it? He wants to start a race war with like a trumpet that summons the dinosaurs, and thinks he's like this omnipotent deity who's been he's basically like essentially delusional, but he's not a threat to anyone at all. They towed this in really incredible line about this character being deranged but also sympathetic and kind of sweet and altruistic at the same time, which is an incredible balance of something that I never expected. And the whole film was essentially predicated on this idea that the FBI and the systems in America is so much about essentially creating their own terrorist threats, and that so many of the situations around them with like stings and like trying to set people up so that you can arrest them for certain such is trying to force this identity of a terrorist on certain people who aren't inherently threatening. So it's a very difficult subject matter that I think it handles it in an incredibly well construed way. It's very funny. It's like, it has a script similar to like Sorkin-esque in that everything is really quick and snappy and everyone's like a wit master, but it's really, really good. And I was incredibly impressed with not only how impactful I found the film, but also just how engaging it is as a viewing experience. So I ultimately think it's definitely worth checking out. And I think it might have a limited theatrical release in its future, but if not, I'm sure you'll be able to find it on streaming one day, because I know Four Lines was a bit of a cult hit. And ultimately, I think this movie is good enough that it's probably going to have a similar reputation. So yeah, I was really impressed. The Day Shall Come. It's great.
Okay.
Yep.
Excellent.
Cool. Huzzah. Well, thank you to everyone who listened to this episode of Medium Shift. We can be found on mediumshift@gmail.com. Routhathon is going to be coming to an end in our next episode, which I know one of the two of us is incredibly excited for a number of reasons. We started with my favorite film of all time, and now we have finally gotten to his. So, what are we doing next episode on, Evan?
Scott Pilgrim vs. the World.
Yep. That's basically it. Another one of Brandon Routh's many comic to film adaptations, and a lot of people would say probably the best. So, yep, that's going to make for a very interesting one, I'm sure. So, until next time, fare thee well.
Scott Pilgrim vs. the World.